At 76, Terry Bradshaw finally reached the point in life where the past no longer hides in the shadows. The smile, the jokes, the larger-than-life personality that America embraced for decades were never the full story. Behind the 4 Super Bowl rings and the proud image of a steel-forged champion lived a man shaped by doubt, pressure, betrayal, and truths he kept buried beneath the roar of victory. The cameras showed the triumph. They rarely showed the fracture lines. Long before he became the face of the Pittsburgh dynasty, Bradshaw carried a weight that almost no one understood. The expectations were crushing. The criticism was relentless. The relationships behind closed doors were far more complicated than they appeared. Even the greatest moments came with a cost that followed him for years. Now, with age giving him distance and honesty giving him freedom, the hidden truths of his journey finally surface. Why did a quarterback who conquered the league still feel hunted by his own legacy? How did a champion who lifted an entire city also feel abandoned at the height of his glory? What happened inside the walls of the franchise that millions of fans never knew? And why did some wounds never fully heal despite rings, records, and applause? This is the story Bradshaw never told in full. A story of rivalry, pressure, conflict, and revelation. A story that defines the man far more than the trophies ever could. Terry Bradshaw entered the National Football League with a spotlight brighter than anything he had ever experienced in college. He arrived in Pittsburgh as the #1 overall pick, a golden-armed quarterback expected to revive a franchise that had spent decades stumbling in the mud. The city wanted a savior. The organization expected a leader. The fans demanded instant greatness. Bradshaw was thrust into a world that moved faster, hit harder, and judged sharper than anything he had known. Every throw became a referendum. Every mistake became a headline. His raw talent was undeniable. His arm strength was unmatched. His toughness fit the Steel City like a glove. Yet the early years told a story that few modern fans truly understand. Bradshaw was not the confident, charismatic champion the world later admired. He was a young man wrestling with doubt. He struggled with the complexity of the offense. He collided with critics who labeled him unintelligent. He faced the suffocating pressure of replacing mediocrity with miracles. The team around him was growing, evolving, and sharpening its identity. Bradshaw was expected to grow at the same pace, yet every lesson came with bruises and scrutiny. The Pittsburgh Steelers of the 1970s were not built on glamour. They were built on sweat discipline and an unbreakable belief that pain was part of the process. Chuck Noll demanded precision. The locker room demanded results. Veterans wanted to win now. Bradshaw entered this environment carrying both extraordinary potential and fragile confidence. It was a combination that made every season feel like a battle for survival. Slowly, the roster transformed. The defense became a force that defined an era. The offensive weapons matured into legends. And at the center of it all, Bradshaw faced the challenge of becoming the leader everyone insisted he had to be. The expectations never softened. The criticism never eased. Each year brought more pressure, more eyes, and more doubt. Yet through these storms, he found the fire that shaped his legacy. The world remembers the Super Bowl victories. They remember the deep throws arcing through cold January air. They remember the celebrations and the trophies. What they forget is the conflict behind those triumphs. Bradshaw's relationships inside the organization were often tense. His battle with self-belief was constant. His journey from overwhelmed young quarterback to hardened champion was forged in moments that the public rarely saw. Behind the grandeur of the dynasty, his personal story unfolded with fear, frustration, and the relentless demand to prove himself over and over again. This was the foundation on which the hidden truths of his career were built. A dynasty rose, a legend formed. But underneath the glory lived a man who carried wounds, rivalries, and revelations that shaped every chapter of his rise. The fifth hidden truth Terry Bradshaw carried through his legendary career surrounded the one relationship that defined his early years more than any other. Chuck Noll was the architect of a dynasty. He was disciplined, exacting, and emotionally distant. His vision built the Pittsburgh Steelers into a machine that crushed opponents and rewrote the identity of a once-forgotten franchise. Yet Noll's stoic leadership style collided sharply with the personality of his young quarterback. Bradshaw entered the league needing guidance, reassurance, and connection. Noll offered none of it. Noll saw football as a profession ruled by precision and execution. Bradshaw saw it as a world driven by instinct and emotion. Their philosophies clashed from the moment the rookie stepped into training camp. Noll wanted silent structure and order. Bradshaw needed encouragement, patience, and clarity. The result was a tension that shaped every decision, every meeting, and every season. While fans later celebrated them as an iconic duo, the truth inside the locker room was far more complicated. Bradshaw often felt abandoned by the very man responsible for shaping him into a champion. The conflict truly ignited during Bradshaw's formative years when turnovers, hesitation, and pressure mounted. Noll refused to shield him from criticism. Instead, he pushed harder, tightening expectations and offering no emotional support. Bradshaw interpreted this as rejection. He questioned whether Noll believed in him. In moments of frustration, he wondered if he would ever be good enough. The public saw a stern coach molding his quarterback. Bradshaw felt he was being judged by a man who did not understand him. The defining moment of their strained relationship arrived during a stretch in the early 70s when Noll benched Bradshaw multiple times. He rotated quarterbacks in search of stability. Each benching struck Bradshaw like a personal indictment. The media amplified every decision. Fans debated his intelligence. Teammates quietly wondered if he would break under the pressure. Through all of this, Noll remained silent. No explanation. No reassurance, only the cold reality that improvement was expected and excuses did not matter. Bradshaw's confidence plummeted as he drifted further from the coach meant to guide him. Yet it was during this low point that the fracture deepened. In one symbolic moment, Bradshaw threw an interception that ended a critical game. Noll walked past him without a word, no gesture, no eye contact. Just a quiet walk into the locker room. The cameras missed it. The fans never saw it. But Bradshaw never forgot. In that silence, he felt the full weight of Noll's disappointment. The image stayed with him for years, carrying into the seasons that eventually defined his greatness. Despite the tension, something remarkable eventually happened. Bradshaw slowly adapted. He learned the offense with discipline. He toughened his mindset. He built emotional armor thick enough to survive the league's brutality. Success arrived in waves. The steel curtain reached historic heights. The offense matured. Championships followed. But even as Bradshaw lifted trophies, he carried a lingering truth. He and Noll were partners in victory, but strangers in trust. The cold truth is this. Bradshaw won multiple Super Bowls under the command of a coach he never fully connected with. He respected Noll's brilliance. He admired his standard. But the emotional distance left bruises that never fully healed. The grudge lived quietly in the background of the dynasty, shaping Bradshaw's view of leadership validation and the burdens of greatness. The fourth hidden truth Terry Bradshaw carried through his career was a conflict that never came from a rival player or a coach. It came from the very people who shaped the public perception of the game. The Pittsburgh media adored the Steelers dynasty, but they were far less forgiving toward the man playing quarterback. From the moment Bradshaw arrived in the city, reporters painted him as a raw talent with a simple mind. They mocked his Southern roots. They questioned his intelligence. They placed every mistake under a magnifying glass, while rarely acknowledging the complexity of the offense he was still learning. Bradshaw entered the league during an era when the quarterback was expected to be stoic, polished, and articulate. He was emotional, candid, and sometimes overwhelmed. Instead of empathy, the press responded with relentless judgment. Headlines asked if he was smart enough to lead a championship team. Radio hosts joked about his decision-making. Every misstep became fuel for debate. The media shaped a narrative that Bradshaw was not just struggling, but fundamentally flawed. He felt attacked long before he ever faced the opposing pass rush on Sundays. The tension escalated during the years when Bradshaw and the Steelers' offense were still developing consistency. Turnovers and growing pains became front-page stories. The defense carried the team, and some reporters implied the quarterback was holding the franchise back. The comparisons to other quarterbacks around the league cut deep. Every interview felt like a trap. Every press conference felt like a test. Bradshaw, still battling his own doubts, now had to navigate a wave of criticism that questioned his very identity as a leader. The defining moment of this bitter relationship came when a prominent columnist wrote a piece describing Bradshaw as too dumb to run an NFL offense. It was crude, personal, and deeply humiliating. Bradshaw read it alone, stunned by the cruelty. He would later admit that the words never left his mind even during his championship years. That moment created a wound that trophies could not fully heal. The city loved its team, but a portion of the media seemed determined to keep him under the shadow of ridicule. As the Steelers began to win, the narrative slowly shifted. Yet Bradshaw noticed something that the public rarely discussed. When the team triumphed, the defense received the glory. When the offense succeeded, the credit often went to the system or the coaching. But when mistakes occurred, the quarterback became the center of blame. The praise never matched the criticism. Bradshaw's confidence grew with each victory, but the memories of those early attacks stayed with him. They shaped his sensitivity to public perception and media narratives long after his playing days ended. The fracture deepened after one heated exchange in a post-game setting. Bradshaw, frustrated by persistent questions about his intelligence, snapped at a reporter. The media used the moment to reinforce their narrative rather than challenge it. Bradshaw realized then that he would never fully win their respect. Championships helped silence the harshest critics, but they did not erase the bitterness of those formative years. The cold truth is this: Terry Bradshaw led one of the greatest dynasties in football history while feeling misunderstood and misjudged by the very people paid to tell his story. Their words carved scars beneath his success, and the rivalry never fully faded. The third hidden truth Terry Bradshaw carried through his career was born not on the field, but inside the quiet, windowless meeting rooms where quarterbacks study tape and fight for their futures. Long before he became the unquestioned leader of a dynasty, Bradshaw lived through years of internal competition that rarely made the headlines. The Steelers' quarterback room of the early 70s was not a supportive brotherhood. It was a pressure chamber where careers rose or collapsed based on a single bad week, a single interception, a single misstep. And in that environment, Bradshaw often felt outnumbered and out of place. Joe Gilliam and Terry Hanratty were more than teammates competing for the same job. They were the embodiment of what the media claimed Bradshaw was not. Gilliam was smooth, confident, and fearless. Hanratty was polished, cerebral, and steady. Both possessed qualities that critics used to highlight Bradshaw's flaws. When Bradshaw faltered early in his career, the coaching staff turned to his rivals without hesitation. Each benching sent a message louder than any words. Bradshaw was not yet trusted, and the men sitting beside him in the meeting room were always ready to take his place. The conflict intensified during the infamous 1974 season, when Gilliam momentarily won the starting job. His fast release and bold decision-making electrified the city. Fans cheered for him. Analysts praised him. Bradshaw watched from the sideline as the narrative shifted again. The Steelers had found their quarterback, and for a brief moment, it was not him. The humiliation cut deep. He studied film alone, replaying every criticism he had heard over the years. The weight of being replaced even temporarily reminded him that his grasp on the position was still fragile. The defining moment of this internal rivalry arrived in a pivotal game when Gilliam struggled and the coaches turned back to Bradshaw. He walked onto the field under heavy pressure. If he failed, the job could slip away for good. He delivered with decisive throws and a hardened edge that had not existed before. But the truth behind that performance was not triumph alone. It was fear. It was resentment. It was the realization that the men in his own meeting room were competitors he could never fully trust. The locker room saw unity. Bradshaw felt a silent war. Hanratty also represented a recurring threat. His presence as a reliable backup kept constant pressure on Bradshaw. Every mistake felt amplified because Hanratty was always waiting in the wings, ready to step in. Bradshaw hated the feeling of being judged not just by the media and the fans, but by the very system built around him. The quarterback room became a place of tension rather than growth. The lack of emotional support from the coaching staff made each rivalry feel personal. Bradshaw internalized the battles until they became part of his identity. Even years later, after he secured the starting job and cemented his legacy, the memories lingered. The competition made him tougher, but it also left emotional bruises. He learned to play with a chip on his shoulder. He learned to distrust praise. He learned that leadership would not be given to him, but taken through resilience and defiance. The cold truth is this. Before Terry Bradshaw became a 4-time Super Bowl champion, he survived a quarterback room that never felt safe. The rivalries sharpened him, but they also left scars that followed him long after the dynasty was built. The second hidden truth Terry Bradshaw carried through his career was the most painful one, because it came from the people he wanted most to win over. The Pittsburgh faithful are among the most passionate fans in the history of the sport. They celebrate their heroes with unmatched devotion, but they also demand a level of performance that leaves no room for uncertainty or growth. When Bradshaw arrived in the city as the first overall pick, he became the symbol of hope. When he struggled, he became the symbol of disappointment. And the fans made sure he felt every ounce of their frustration. Bradshaw's early seasons were marked by inconsistency. He threw interceptions at a rate that made headlines. He hesitated in big moments. He battled the complexity of a new offense. The fans responded with boos echoing through the cold Pittsburgh air. They questioned his mental toughness. They questioned his intelligence. They questioned whether he could ever be the man to lead the franchise out of mediocrity. For a young quarterback already fighting internal doubt, the criticism cut deeper than any hit he ever took on the field. The tension escalated during one brutal afternoon at Three Rivers Stadium, when Bradshaw threw multiple interceptions in a game the Steelers were expected to win. As he jogged off the field, the crowd rained down jeers so loud that even the defense sitting on the bench turned to look. Bradshaw later admitted he wanted to disappear. He felt humiliated, exposed, and alone. The stadium that should have been his sanctuary became the place where he felt most vulnerable. The fans' disappointment grew into open hostility, and Bradshaw felt as if the entire city had turned against him. The defining moment of this fractured relationship came when the fans began chanting for his replacement. They wanted Gilliam. They wanted Hanratty. They wanted anyone but the quarterback struggling under the weight of expectation. Bradshaw heard the chants as he stood on the sideline. He tried to stay focused, but the truth was impossible to ignore. The people he was supposed to lead did not believe in him. The betrayal stung far more than the media's criticism or the coach's silence. Fans are supposed to lift their quarterback. Instead, they tore him down in real time. Even when success eventually arrived, the memories of those early years lingered. Bradshaw threw game-winning touchdowns. He delivered playoff victories. He led his team to championships. But a part of him never forgot the feeling of being rejected by the city he fought so hard to represent. The cheers in later years felt different. He welcomed them, but he did not trust them. He carried the fear that one bad game could bring the boos back. The fracture deepened after a mysterious ending to his career in Pittsburgh. When Bradshaw underwent elbow surgery and eventually moved on, Some fans questioned his toughness and loyalty. Rumors spread, misunderstandings grew. Bradshaw felt the fans judged him without knowing the truth. The distance between him and Pittsburgh widened even as the dynasty he helped build became legendary. The cold truth is this. Terry Bradshaw became a 4-time Super Bowl champion while carrying the memory of a city that once turned its back on him. The fans later embraced him as a hero, but the wounds of those early years never fully healed. He loved Pittsburgh. He also feared it. And that contradiction followed him long after he left the field. The first and most powerful hidden truth Terry Bradshaw carried through his legendary career was the quiet, unresolved rift between him and the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. It was the conflict no one saw on television. It was the wound that never fully healed, even as the dynasty flourished. While teammates celebrated victories together and the city immortalized its champions, Bradshaw lived with a persistent sense of emotional distance from the franchise he helped transform into an empire. The relationship looked whole from the outside. On the inside, it was strained by years of miscommunication, silence, and unspoken resentment. The root of the tension began early in Bradshaw's career. The organization expected instant greatness from the #1 pick. When he struggled, their patience was thin. Decisions were made without including him. Support was minimal. Bradshaw often felt like an outsider in the building meant to develop him. As he matured, he expected the franchise to grow with him. Instead, the emotional gap widened. Coaches and executives valued his arm and toughness, but they rarely acknowledged the toll the pressure took on him. He played through injuries. He endured intense scrutiny. Yet he felt as though the organization viewed him as a replaceable part rather than the emotional centerpiece of a rising dynasty. The conflict reached its most painful phase late in Bradshaw's career when he suffered a devastating elbow injury. He tried to fight through the pain, convinced he owed the city and the team one last push. The organization, focused on appearances and long-term planning, handled the situation with a level of detachment that left Bradshaw feeling betrayed. He believed his injury was minimized publicly. He believed decisions were made without transparency. He believed the organization treated him not as the face of the franchise, but as a fading asset. The defining moment of this hidden rift came in his final season. Bradshaw attempted a comeback, despite a torn tendon in his elbow. He pushed his body beyond its limits. In one painful December game after throwing a touchdown, he felt the tendon snap. Reporters saw the injury. Fans saw the moment. But what they did not see was the emotional weight behind it. Bradshaw walked off the field, knowing he had given the franchise everything he had left. Yet, he also felt the franchise had not given him the same devotion in return. The silence from the organization during his recovery deepened his sense of abandonment. After his final snap, Bradshaw quietly slipped away from Pittsburgh. He did not retire with a public celebration. He did not receive a grand farewell. He did not stand on a podium surrounded by executives and teammates. He left in a way that symbolized the emotional distance that had defined the relationship for years. The organization moved forward without acknowledging the lingering tension. Bradshaw moved on with the feeling that the team he helped build had never truly understood him. The fracture widened in the years that followed. Bradshaw rarely returned to Pittsburgh. He did not attend major team events. Fans wondered why the beloved quarterback seemed estranged from the franchise that defined his legacy. The truth was far more personal than the public ever realized. Bradshaw felt hurt by the way his career ended. He felt overlooked. He felt misunderstood. And he carried those feelings long after the cheering stopped. The cold truth is this. Terry Bradshaw led the Pittsburgh Steelers to 4 Super Bowl championships while living with the painful belief that the organization did not value him as deeply as he valued them. The trophies united them. The silence divided them. And the emotional distance became the deepest hidden truth of his entire career. The final hidden truth Terry Bradshaw carried through his career was not a rivalry with a coach, a teammate, or the media. It was a lifelong battle with the man staring back at him in the mirror. Long before he lifted trophies and long after he walked away from the field, Bradshaw fought an internal war shaped by insecurity, self-doubt, and the pressure to live up to expectations that once felt impossible. This conflict followed him more quietly than any opponent he ever faced, yet it shaped every chapter of his journey. Bradshaw's upbringing taught him to push through pain and hide vulnerability. The NFL rewarded toughness, but punished emotion. He entered the league already carrying the weight of perfectionism. Every mistake felt like a personal failure. Every criticism felt like confirmation of his worst fears. Even as he evolved into a champion, the internal voice that questioned his worth never fully disappeared. It sharpened during his benchings. It whispered through the jeers of fans. It strengthened during media attacks. It haunted him during long nights studying film, convinced he was one bad game away from being exposed. The defining moment of this internal battle came late in his career when injuries mounted and the end loomed. Bradshaw stood at the crossroads of greatness and doubt. He had achieved more than nearly any quarterback in history, yet he felt as if he had not done enough to silence the insecurities that had lived within him since childhood. When he walked away from football, he left behind the applause but carried the private truth that his biggest opponent had always been himself. The cold truth is this: Terry Bradshaw conquered the league, but the battle inside his own mind shaped his legacy more profoundly than any rivalry on the field. Terry Bradshaw's story is often told as a tale of triumph, a journey defined by championships confetti and a dynasty that reshaped the identity of an entire city. But beneath the surface lived a far more complex truth. His career was not carried by the wind of effortless greatness. It was built through friction, doubt and conflict that forged a different kind of strength. Bradshaw did not become a legend because everything came easily to him. He became a legend because almost nothing did. Every rivalry, every criticism, every fracture he endured carved deeper meaning into his rise. His tension with Chuck Noll forced him to become more disciplined than he ever imagined. His battles with the Pittsburgh media taught him to stand tall while the world questioned him. The competition inside the quarterback room sharpened his edge, pushing him to evolve into a leader who refused to break under pressure. The rejection from fans fueled a resilience that no playbook could teach. And the quiet conflict with the Steelers organization shaped the emotional distance that defined the end of his career. These moments were not isolated chapters. They were threads woven into a single defining tapestry. As the dynasty grew, Bradshaw's role transformed from a young quarterback fighting for survival into the hardened cornerstone of a franchise built on grit and fury. The steel curtain dominated, but Bradshaw's contributions were irreplaceable. His arm delivered the deep shots that ripped open playoff games. His courage steadied the offense in moments when everything seemed to collapse. His leadership carried a team of bruising personalities across seasons soaked in pressure and expectation. Each championship ring reflected not just victory, but the internal battles he had conquered to stand on those podiums. Beyond trophies and glory, the truth that defined Bradshaw was not his success, but the cost of achieving it. His body took a beating that lingered long after retirement. His mind endured years of doubt and conflict that the public never saw. The loneliness of leadership weighed on him, especially in an era when emotional vulnerability was treated as weakness. Bradshaw carried the burden of expectation alone, even while surrounded by teammates celebrated as brothers in arms. Yet the legacy he forged remains inseparable from the contradictions he lived through. His relationship with Pittsburgh was both loving and painful. The city embraced him in victory, but doubted him in struggle. The franchise immortalized the dynasty, but let him drift away quietly after his final injury. Bradshaw gave everything he had to the Steelers, but he also learned to protect his heart from the cold realities of the business. As time passed, reflection softened the edges of his story. Bradshaw began to see his conflicts not as scars, but as symbols of what he endured to reach the top. The tension with Noel revealed the challenges of two men with different emotional languages. The battles with the media exposed the brutality of early criticism that helped shape his resilience. The rivalries in the quarterback room became reminders of the fierce competition that defines greatness. The rejection from fans became a lesson in how pressure can distort loyalty. And the rift with the organization became a quiet reminder of how even greatness can be misunderstood. In the end, the heart of Bradshaw's legacy lives not in the hardware he accumulated, but in the human struggle behind it. His story mirrors the identity of the Steel City itself. Rough, gritty, unpolished, and resilient. He was a champion, forged through conflict, a leader shaped through adversity, a man defined by the battles no camera ever captured. When he looks back today, Bradshaw can see the dynasty from a vantage point few men ever reach. He knows the journey was imperfect. He knows the wounds were real. But he also knows that every fracture, every doubt, and every hidden truth carried him to a place in history where very few stand. His greatness was not born from ease, but from endurance. Not from applause, but from resilience. Not from the light of victory, but from the shadows he fought through to reach it. This is the true legacy of Terry Bradshaw, a legacy defined by conflict healed by time and remembered through the truths he once kept buried deep within his story. Terry Bradshaw's journey proves that even the brightest legends carry shadows the world never sees. His triumphs were unforgettable, but the hidden truths behind them reveal a far more powerful story. Now that you have seen the rivalries, the fractures, and the emotional battles that shaped his rise, the question becomes yours to answer. Which moment defined him the most? Which conflict cut the deepest? Which truth changed the way you see the man behind 4 championships? The history of the NFL is filled with giants, but very few were forged through the kind of pressure Bradshaw endured. His story invites every fan to look beyond the surface and reconsider what greatness truly costs. Was he right to carry those wounds for so long? Was the criticism he endured fair, or part of a system that pushes its stars to the breaking point? And how different might his legacy have been if the relationships around him had been built on understanding rather than distance? If you have your own perspective on the hidden truths behind Bradshaw's career, share it below. Which rivalry shocked you the most? Which revelation made you rethink the proud image of the Steelers dynasty? Your insight helps uncover even deeper layers of the past, keeping the golden era of football alive for new generations to explore. And if you enjoyed uncovering these untold stories of the gridiron, make sure to subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths. This channel is dedicated to revealing the rivalries, secrets, and dark truths that shaped football's greatest icons. Join us as we continue to explore the legends who defined the sport not just through glory, but through the struggles they carried behind the scenes.